Here we have part 2 of the video series on how to reconcile your Amazon FBA ledger. And we're in the software called SKUio, which is our company. And it is an e-commerce first ERP that makes this process super easy, as automated as possible. So we have the initial inventory that we download in the background that you can see here shows the ending inventory, the in transit, and then we calculate the total inventory. And if there are ledgers, those appear as well. So let's take a look at this one that has a bunch of ledgers. So we have shipments, adjustments, all the ledger events get associated to the appropriate FN SKU. So in order to reconcile, we need to first define what it does reconciliation mean in our system. So let me take a look at the ledger section, because ultimately we're trying to reconcile the ledgers. So I'm going to sort this by date, just get us started. And you can see that some of these have this detail report. So in the background, once we download the ledger, we're also downloading all the detail reports, such as customer returns, shipment details, removal shipment details, removal orders, all that stuff. So we need the detail report for certain types of reports in order to reconcile, because reconciliation for us means that we're creating the corresponding ledger in our system, in the SKU system. And we want to have intelligence as to what these events are. So a vendor return needs a removal shipment detail report because a removal shipment detail report has this order ID. And this order ID corresponds to removal order so that we can automatically tell when a removal order has shipped. So we would record a shipment once that gets reconciled. Similarly, if there were receipts actually don't need a detail report because the ledger report in itself has this reference ID. So we have this here and we can associate it to an inbound shipment. And hence, we could automatically detect when your warehouse transfers to FBA or your purchase orders to FBA get received. And we'll automatically record the receipt based on the receipt of the ledger. So all that magic happens in the background. Going back to the ledger report here. So we're trying to associate the ledger to the corresponding detail report. I guess one more to mention would be the shipment. The shipment has, well, the ledger itself, if we look at the data from here, doesn't really have any information saying what this shipment is for. So we want to link it to a shipment because a shipment has the Amazon order ID, and hence in this Amazon order ID, we'll then know the tracking, even though it was FBA, we'll know the tracking, we'll know the date it shipped, we'll know all that detail. And we only mark the ledger event once that detail is linked and the ledger is reconciled. So that's generally the process. So in the background, we automatically link the ledger to the detail report. But here's another kicker with Amazon and the nuances. Sometimes Amazon has ledgers with inaccurate merchant SKU. And we use this merchant SKU data point in order to line it up with a detail report. So that interferes with the reconciliation process. In addition, sometimes the ledgers could be for a shipment quantity 2, let's say, and it corresponds to multiple detail reports. And then finally, sometimes the ledgers have no corresponding detail report at all, especially with vendor returns, we've noticed, and we'll show you how we deal with that. So let me take a look at some of these scenarios. If I look at shipment, no details, just a filter set that says the event type shipments and there's no detail report, we could see that these are actually the latest ones. So I'm just focusing on January. We see that these two do not have a detail report. So this is a double whammy and it requires some sort of manual check for now. Eventually we may have rules to automate it, but you can easily filter out and identify which ones are causing an issue. You could open up the ledger, and the ledger process is to reconcile it against the detail. So it allows you to link it up. And here we have the details, and you can see that the merchant SKU does not correspond to the merchant SKU in the detail report, and it's the only possible match. We base it on date, we base it on quantity, we base it on the fulfillment center, all these factors. Now, I know in this seller account, this merchant SKU is not even an FBA item. So we're dealing with situations where Amazon is producing a report, in this case a ledger, that has inaccurate information. The merchant SKU is not an FBA item. It is the merchant fulfilled equivalent of that item, but it's still not the right item. So these nuances, again, we have ways to handle it. Most of it's automated. This one just required a manual check. So if I link it to the detail report, that is taken care of. Let's see, we also have this one. So this is the one that's a double whammy, where it's not only the wrong merchant SKU, but it doesn't correspond to a single detail report. So we have quantity 2 here, and we can just select them both, and then that sums up to the 2, and we know that this is a match. Now, most of the time, you're not going to have to deal with these nuances because, again, we automate most of the matches, but there may be a few that require manual attention because we don't want to link the wrong items by mistake. So those are a couple of nuances. Now, for vendor returns, there are these two here, and right now we haven't tried the reconciliation process, but once we do, we'll have a way to deal with this. But essentially, this ledger report on the 24th, which is a vendor return, aka a removal order, has no corresponding detail report. So from my experience with this particular ledger, it's never going to come. I've checked on Seller Central, and there simply never is a detail report. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the process to reconcile. And this, again, most of this happens in the background automatically, but I'm just going to reconcile all these, which reconciles the initial inventory. Then I'm going to reconcile the ledger, which does take some time. So I'm going to click this button and let it run in the background, and then come back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back and on a different screen. This is the ledger reconciliation report accessible via the menu, and this shows the progress of reconciliation per FN SKU. And you see the big numbers over here, we're 99% reconciled. Per SKU, you can kind of see the reconciliation date. So we're trying to reconcile for January 31st or up to January 31st, so all these are good. Sometimes there may be a gap, and that just means that there is ledger data that goes beyond the reconciliation date. So there's some that can't be reconciled. And then some have a full green bar, and this just means that we have fully reconciled, but there's only data up to the 19th, which is fine. So this one actually is a problem because it's a ledger up to the 5th of February, but the reconciliation date is not there. So that's probably one of these errors that is summarized up here. So this summarization tells you the various reasons why reconciliation couldn't happen. So we have missing sales order, pending detail report processing, and blocked by an earlier ledger. The missing sales order, I'm sure, is something in February, so we're not going to bother with that. These two, we can see that when we go back to the ledger detail. So let's do that. And here, if I go to not reconciled, let's see what we have. We only have these 4 entries that are part of January that are not reconciling. So let's take a look at the details. So vendor returns. Vendor returns is one that I mentioned before, and now we have a different view here that wasn't here before. The reason why is now our system is detecting a reconciliation error of a pending detail report processing, and we give an option to say, hey, if there's no detail report coming, if you've exhausted that data search and can't find anything, then yeah, ideally we want to create a vendor return that corresponds to a removal order, but there simply just isn't the data. It's probably a liquidation of some sort in this case, and we can see the disposition is customer damaged. So here, instead, we could just link it to an adjustment on the SKU side, and this button is here conveniently to do so. Okay, so now that that is reconciled, it won't appear on, it'll disappear from the list. And let's have one more. There's one more at the same situation. Let's do the same thing. And refresh. And now we have these two. But these two, it says reconciliation blocked by earlier ledger. This was likely the vendor returns that were blocking the later processing of this customer return ledger. The reason why is we have to reconcile in order. That's how the audit trail works, the FIFO layer integrity. So now we could just click reconcile all. You'll see, let me just refresh this data. We're had a couple more that got reconciled, and we should be even a couple more once we click this button. And now it's not going to take too long because it's just processing a couple. All right, so you see it added a couple there. Then we have no more that are not reconciled in the month of January. So here we are, we've reconciled all the ledgers for the month of January, and now you can take a look at the valuation report, which is based on FIFO. So we'll take a look here. January 31st. And I'm going to pause this and wait for this report to load as well. Okay, here we have it. We have the total valuation of inventory. We have the total inventory quantity, and we have the total summary inventory. Now, why this is relevant is because while I was reconciling the ledger through that process, we are actually also reconciling against the summary number. And if you recall from part one of the video, those summary numbers do not match by default. So there was a bit of magic that happened behind the scenes to make these numbers match. And let me go through exactly what that is. So this is all good. The end result, we have a match. But in order to get here, we had to do some adjustments. So I'm going to go to this report, ledger summary adjustments. And this gives us 213 events, mostly for the month of January, where we had to adjust something. And you can see the descriptions here are total inventory adjustment. We have a missing without summary report adjustment. And there should be one other reason if I filter this out. Actually, let me take a look at the second page and see if there is any unknown events adjustment. Here is the unknown events adjustment, the third case. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. All right, so total inventory adjustment, let's see what happened here. We have the FN SKU, and this was on the 5th. So now I'm going to take a look at one within the date range. This one on the 2nd. Go to ledger summaries. Okay, so let me show a few more results here. On the 31st. And there's two different ones because one of them is customer damage, the other one is not. This one in particular was for customer damage one. So let's take a look at that. So in this summary, we can see we had to do an adjustment. It says total inventory adjustment, quantity -2. The reason is we take a look at the previous balance. So the previous balance for the previous day, if we look at that for this damaged unit on the 30th, the ending balance total was 72. Just make sure that's right. Oh, sorry, 4 units. 2 ending warehouse balance, 2 in transit. And then if we go back to this detail over here, we have 4 units. We have 0 ledgers for the day, but we have an ending balance of 2. In transit didn't change, but ending balance actually changed. So something happened. Amazon, in their summary report, they just made these items disappear. So this is why we do an adjustment, and this is why we have a separate section to record these adjustments, because in these situations, you may want to open a case with Amazon because they're losing your inventory. So you see the calculation here. We process the adjustment, so now everything reconciles. Before we have this reconciled, you see it gives a warning. There is a summary ledger total discrepancy, shows the math and the symbols, and says that basically when you reconcile this, we're going to take care of that adjustment automatically. So let's do that again. Just create a new adjustment, and we're good. So that's one type. The other type, if I go back to the summary here, we have a missing without summary report adjustment. So this again is on the second. So let me just go back a bit for the data and look at this one here. This was a defective unit of this FN SKU on the 17th. I'll just look for the record. Defective. Okay. So essentially, the one that has the adjustment is this one on the 16th. And let me show you why. On the 16th, we have an ending balance of 1 unit. We have that ending balance of 1 unit here. Actually, sorry, it's here. And then the 17th has no data for the defective. Let me just filter by this disposition to make it easier to see. Yeah, there's a gap in the data. So for that day, Amazon has essentially lost that inventory. If you were to say, what was my inventory valuation on the 17th? Well, we still want to account for that, what happened, but Amazon's saying there's essentially no unit. So we have to adjust down. So we do that the day before, or the last day that has a balance, and we just do this adjustment. Missing without summary report adjustment quantity -2. So I said -1, or sorry, 1 left over, but let me just double check that now. It was actually total inventory of 2. So there was an in-transit balance and an ending balance, and they both got lost because no report on the 17th. So that's the second type of adjustment we do. The third type of adjustment we do is the unknown events adjustment, which I mentioned in part 1 of the video. Let me open up let's see, unknown events for the 12th. Actually, I could even filter by unknown events greater than 0. Okay. So on the 12th here shows an unknown event here on that date for the summary report. So this one actually also had a total inventory adjustment. But you see, we handle this unknown event by simply doing an adjustment. As you saw in part 1 of the video, these are just events that occur, likely to do with warehouse transfers, and we have to adjust for them. So if we didn't do these 213 adjustments, then the valuation report would be off. So what we've done is we've created these adjustments in an intelligent way with appropriate notes in a way that you could filter, open up cases, handle, and as a result, now the numbers match. And the valuation should be accurate according to the summary report, aka the month-end report on Amazon, based on FIFO inventory valuation. So you can see through this process, it took a while to go through. There's a lot of nuances. This whole process is still in beta, and there's a lot of little things to connect the dots. But overall, this is an incredible time saver for reconciling your end-of-month inventory with Amazon, while also having visibility on sales orders to a corresponding ledger, on removal orders, on inbounds. It's all part of the SKUio ecosystem. And we're also keeping track of your inventory valuation through a FIFO layer inventory valuation system. So hopefully, if you find this useful, reach out and we could answer any questions or go through a more in-depth demo.